I probably should have checked to make sure that this was working. Actually, don't even know if I'm fully streaming right now. Properties. Who's got the properties? All right, cool. Been a while since I've done this, so you're going to have to bear with me. Or not. Either way. All right, sweet. Looks like we're good. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am back after what appears to be an extensive layoff. I don't even think I uploaded my first round predictions video to the YouTube channel. I think I only live streamed it on Twitch, which is a massive failure on my part, which is great because I get to reveal to you guys today what my first round picks were and all of their glory, aka massive failure. And then we can look ahead to the future, starting tomorrow night with the Fiesta Bowl. The good news is that my semifinal picks are all still alive, all perfectly still alive, which isn't saying much given the percentage chance increase that experiences as you kind of go down the bracket. But would have been a really awkward situation if one of the teams I predicted in the first round was supposed to be in the semifinal, and not a lot of the teams that I predicted in the first round are making it to the quarterfinals. So that's awkward. Well, I guess without further ado, we can kind of sit back and talk about it, right? So let's go ahead and switch over here. And we're just going to start from the top, right? Actually, you know what? Let's go chronologically. I think that it's worth kind of addressing these games one by one as they occurred. And that obviously takes us to South Bend, where the Notre Dame Fighting Irish hosted the Indiana Hoosiers. Can I just start by saying this? All four of these games had an exceptional home playoff environment. I know a lot of people were sort of doubtful, especially with Penn State's ticket sales being so cheap. It almost seemed like they were sort of begging fans to attend. And then if you watched even just like the live broadcast, let alone some of the few videos that I've actually had the privilege of seeing people that were actually in the stands, oh my word, like these games were fucking awesome. There's really no other way to say it besides that. And Notre Dame was no exception. As you can see here, I initially predicted Indiana to go into South Bend and get the upset. Not because I think lowly of Notre Dame. It's just I really kind of leaned into the idea that Curt Cignetti, being the phenomenal game planner that he's lauded to be coming from the Nick Saban coaching tree, forgive me for using a Zoomer term, but I just thought he was going to be able to cook more. And they were just overwhelmed from start to finish. I mean, the 10-point win for Notre Dame is going to make the game from a box score standpoint look a lot closer than it actually was. And the reality was this was an ass whooping all the way up until Indiana gets the backdoor cover late in the fourth. And it was for one, a moment of vindication, I think, for Marcus Freeman and the Fighting Irish, because I think that if there was any doubt about his coaching acumen going into this game, and this is like, I feel like Notre Dame haters are going to hear me say this, and then they'll be like, well, what have they done? Besides, they beat Indiana. Like, who fucking cares? You tell me the number of teams that could have survived a loss to Northern Illinois, the second game of the season, and then rally to not only like rally and make a playoff berth, which a lot of people are going to say, oh, big whoop, it's Notre Dame, they don't even have to play in a conference championship. And it's like, no. Like, if you actually watch this football team play week to week, they were improving in spite of the fact that they've been experiencing losses. Now, if there's a certain Notre Dame fan that I got into a little bit of a chit chat with in the preseason on YouTube, he might watch this video and hear what I'm saying now and think that I am such a hypocrite. And the reason is that going into this season, with the turnover they had on the offensive line, and then also the preseason injury they had to, I believe it was their starting left tackle, or projected starting left tackle, I was like, hey, You have a quarterback in Riley Leonard that's coming off of an injury himself after transferring from Duke, that is not a lauded passer. Like, great, his legs are his most notable asset that he possesses. But again, he's coming off of an injury. We have no idea what he's going to look like coming off of that injury. And then, like I said, he doesn't have the chops passing that you would hope for a team that's going to go challenge for a national championship. And then to make matters worse, oh, by the way, his offensive line is incredibly inexperienced and also suffering injuries at some of the places where they did have experience coming in. I think they answered the bell like week to week, and then losing like Ben Morrison, in the defensive secondary, and still just being able to consistently dominate their opponents from the NIU game moving forward, and then showing improvement too, like as Riley Leonard, because I think people like don't really understand like the extent of the injury and what was going on. Like Riley Leonard was not 100% at the beginning of this season, and he still went into Texas A&M and got that win. It was a bit of a snooze fest of a game, quite frankly. It was more of a defensive, slugfest. Offenses really just weren't getting a lot of traction either way, and you can say that that's, pre-Marcel Reed, Texas A&M, and that's pre-fully healthy Riley Leonard. Both are true, but the reality is that this team has evolved into... I would hope they're at their final form by now. I don't know if I would necessarily be... if I'm Marcus Freeman, that I'm like, I don't think that we've really peaked yet. Like, if that's something that I would feel comfortable saying at this point in the season, I think that I would hope that what we are right now is a bit of a finished product, because what you want is, you as the coach, you want to know that what you've got on that roster, what you've got on that sideline, is what it's going to be moving forward as you challenge for a national championship. What you don't want your opponents to know is to know everything you've got in your tool bag. And I think that that's what we're going to get tomorrow night, or not tomorrow night, sorry, the night after, in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. No, again, they were just handing out a wholesale ass whooping to the Indiana Hoosiers that fateful Friday night. And it was like, for me personally, somebody that set a lot of stock in defending Indiana and their right to be here in this playoff, it initially took some wind out of my sails. And then I had to kind of step back, because I was looking at it like from a very 50-meter target standpoint and being like, wow, objectively, this is not a good look if you're Indiana. And then you kind of have to step back and assess this the way that you do other teams in the past, like quite frankly, how you've assessed Notre Dame in the past. Notre Dame has been that team that finds itself making the playoffs some years, and then they just get curb stomped by their opponents, but their opponents often end up being the ones that go on and win the national championship anyway. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, like, is Notre Dame overrated, or have they beaten all the people they were supposed to beat, and then they go up against the Alabamas and the teams that are supposed to beat them, and then they lose? Is that not the expected outcome anyway? Obviously, if you're a Notre Dame fan, like you hope to have a puncher's chance and to be able to someday, win one of those games, much like a team like Penn State, which we're going to talk about very soon as well. That said, I think that this is a team in Notre Dame that I don't want to say this just yet. I'll wait till we're doing the Notre Dame Georgia preview, and I'll lay out this little nugget. Then I'll just say right now that I think this Notre Dame team is not the kind of Notre Dame team that people should expect to see based off of past renditions of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame haters are going to disagree. Notre Dame haters are going to run all the way to the bank betting against them, thinking that I'm some sort of lunatic. And look, I bet against them. I picked against them. I didn't bet any money, but I picked against them. And here I am being forced to eat crow and seeing their praises. And even then, when I did my preview video for the first round, I told myself that this was 100% a vibes check, kind of pick, where I was like, hey, like, objectively speaking, Notre Dame's favored for a reason. I think Kurt Sinetti's going to be able to get into his bag and do some things that Notre Dame isn't expecting. And Indiana's defense has been objectively successful against most of the competition they faced. Even the Ohio State game, they were really good. It's just, when your offense isn't generating enough success, it's hard for the defense to sustain a certain level of play necessary to get a win, unless you're dealing with a truly, truly elite defense. And I didn't think Indiana had to be that in order to beat Notre Dame. And it turns out that Notre Dame just was that kind of defense that was going to be able to suffocate them, and really just kind of showcasing the narrative of Notre Dame this year of like, hey, like if you're a team lesser than us and you're not the Northern Illinois Huskies, we are going to basically make it impossible for you to do what you want to do on offense. And we're going to have the time to sort of let Riley Leonard get healthy and evolve and progress offensively to this beast that we see now, where you have this two-headed Hydra in Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard in the running game that I don't really care what the passing game has or hasn't been consistently, because if you look up and down this bracket, you find me the team that has played consistently in and out week to week. I'll wait. I've told multiple friends and family members that there's no elite teams this year, in my personal opinion, at least in terms of consistent week-to-week performance. Not that there shouldn't be elite teams. There's some rosters in this bracket that we're going to talk about here in a little bit that absolutely should fall in the elite category, but we've just had some real egg-headed or boneheaded games from them this season that kind of leave you scratching your head, and even in some years where it's like, there's these upsets that happen. Some of them haven't been upsets. Some of them have. But some of them haven't been upsets. Like for instance, Oregon, Wisconsin, you kind of like walk away from that game thinking like, okay, yeah, like Wisconsin couldn't really do much offensively, and Oregon's defense, especially Mateo Uyunglele stepping up, kind of owns that game for them. But the fuck was their offense doing? Like, why? How does a roster like that let that happen? Even in a winning effort. And that's just a story that ends in a happy face for Oregon, right? Like, that's why they're the number one team in the country, quite frankly, because even their worst game, unless you count Idaho in week 1 when they were suffering offensive line injuries, even their worst game in the regular season, they end in a win. Some of these teams on this bracket have not been as lucky like their opponent they're going to be facing in the Rose Bowl. Again, we'll get to that later. So anyway, South Bend, phenomenal environment. Loved the uniforms. They had don't quote me on this, I believe it was a defensive player, last name of Doe, I believe his last name is, that they actually had his last name in his native language. I don't want to misspeak and say what I think it was because I don't actually know off the top of my head. I really apologize. I just thought it was cool as shit with the chrome gold and everything on the jerseys. So yeah. Oh, while I'm here, hang on. Let me sign into chat because I just linked my stream. Full disclosure, I just got back from a trip for the holidays with family. I had a fucking spectacular time. Did I spell that wrong? I sure did, because I am an ignoramus. All right, hang on, stay by. But yeah, no, had a phenomenal trip with my family. Hang on. My wife is telling me there's a sound coming from the kitchen. I gotta go check it. Fuck back in your room. Go to bed. Close the door. So speaking of holidays, my kids got this Paw Patrol bus, or sorry, we got them a Paw Patrol bus thing. It's massive, makes sounds. obviously I've got the headphones on. I can't hear anything. My wife texts me and she's like, "Hey, can you go see what the hell that sound is in the kitchen? I'm in the bedroom." She's in the bathroom. All right, I probably should have said that, but she's in the bathroom, and couldn't get up. So I go out. My son's in the living room, crouched over this, and he's like, "Hi, Daddy," like playing all innocent. I have to take away their new toy before they've even really had, like, they literally just opened it today. Like, it was so big, like, while we were like at our family's house in New Mexico, like there wasn't really enough space for them to take it out and play with it, so we just kind of left it and told them we'd open it when we got back home here in Texas. And so here we are. Anyway, had a fantastic holiday with my family. It was great seeing some people that I haven't seen in years. A lot of people. There was actually a couple people that got to meet my kids for the first time, and they're 6 years old, so that was pretty sick. Sad to go, but I am also a little happy to kind of be back in our space where we can just kind of relax and not go and whatnot. That said, probably going to be making another trip here in the next week. Not to go see everybody, but to go see my uncle elsewhere for football purposes. And speaking of which, let's continue moving on. Let's review the next game that occurred, and that was the Penn State SMU game. And that was another game where I predicted an upset, and I'm going to just kind of leave this one short and sweet. Once again, objectively, Penn State, the better team, should have had every reason to believe that they were going to win. I just thought that SMU was being a bit overlooked. Really liked what I saw from them in their, almost comeback effort against Clemson in the ACC championship game. And then Kevin Jennings in the whiteout when it was, up 20 mile per hour wind gusts and negative 11 trillion degrees outside in Happy Valley, played quite possibly the worst game a quarterback could have played in that game, and Penn State rolled. There's not much more to say about it, quite frankly. I could get into it a little bit more when we preview their matchup against Boise State and what I really think about that team, but I kind of want to keep this a little short. So then moving on to the next game that happened was the Clemson-Texas game. Again, I predicted Clemson just because I know in my preview video that I did for the first round, I said a lot of good things about Clemson, but I think the real important takeaway is how underwhelmed I've been by Texas this year on the offensive side of the ball. They struggle in the red zone mightily. Quinn Ewers, I think, is probably the biggest linchpin that they have on that team. And I know Texas fans would strongly disagree with this, and I apologize. But I don't think he's still 100% back from the oblique injury, quite frankly. Obviously, he has the ankle thing going on, and it was pretty remarkable how in the SEC championship game, it was the Texas A&M game, when Arch Manning comes in and gets that scrambling touchdown to the pylon. Obviously, all of a sudden, Quinn Ewers remembers he can run again. I think that him and another team on this bracket by the name of Georgia, their former starting quarterback, there's a lot of similarities to draw there. They're guys with a lot of tools, and they've been lauded, and they're these high profile, prospects coming out of high school, and then you see these flashes here and there, and you're like, that's that guy, that's that dude that we were talking about, man. But I still think they got it. There's just something off. And that was enough for me to see a team like Clemson with a Cade Klubnik that looked like he had been somewhat revitalized and believed in himself and was really just kind of making strides throughout the season. That I was like, I think Clemson wants this a bit more. And the purest fan that I am at heart was going to lean into that. I think 9 times out of 10, there is that 10th time where I just have to look at, the paper and say, yeah, man, Clemson's losing this game, and it's not going to be close. We kind of met in the middle. It was closer than it probably should have been. And Texas moves on. And then going to another beatdown, we had Ohio State absolutely throttling Tennessee. I don't want to spend too much time on this game and what actually transpired, other than coming off the Michigan win, there was two Ohio States that could show up. And this was largely the narrative from most media outlets coming into this game was, which Ohio State are we going to see? Is it going to be an Ohio State that is disheveled and distraught and downtrodden because they've lost to Michigan for the fourth year in a row, and against, not even arguably, objectively, the worst Michigan team that they have lost to in that 4-year stretch? With objectively the best roster that they have had in that 4-year stretch. I think only argument that you could probably make in that is that C.J. Stroud is a far better quarterback than either Kyle McCord or Will Howard of the last 2 years. But still, I think player for player, depth for depth, this Ohio State team has got more Jimmies and Joes than previous iterations that have lost to Michigan in the last 4 years. That said, the other outcome or possibility in a lot of people's eyes was they drive the damn Ferrari the way that it was meant to be driven instead of driving it like it's a Passat, and that's what we got. Like, they left no doubt. Tennessee was never in this game. Nico Iamaleava. Pretty sure I'll fuck that up. Iamaleava. There we go. Jesus Christ. Nico literally got his skull caved in, the skull of his helmet. It was like a nice, like 6-inch fucking crack in the dome of his helmet. I mean, they came for scalps like in that game, and you walk out of that game and you're like, okay, I really thought that Tennessee team was pretty good. I mean, not perfect. Like, I want to go back to, I don't think any team in this bracket is perfect. I don't think there's an elite team in this bracket. I think there's a couple teams that should be elite, and they just haven't really shown themselves to be that consistently this year. But Tennessee was supposed to be like really good in spite of their imperfections, and got absolutely dominated from first snap to last. And yeah, we got our answer as to what Ohio State was coming out of that Michigan game. And that result, much in the same way that it can bring about, or much in the same way that the loss to Michigan brought about this sort of like two paths that Ohio State could follow. What they did to Tennessee that night brings about these two paths that I think everybody that they could potentially face moving forward is going to view them in that, holy shit, that's the best team in this bracket, or okay, play like that next week. Because you haven't shown yourself able to do that this year. You haven't fired on all of those cylinders every single game this year. Granted, like I said, no team in this bracket really has done that. So it's like one of those where you kind of have to like fake yourself out and be like, you're not going to be able to replicate that. But it's like, are you going to be able to replicate your A game? Do you think you have to? I don't know. We'll get into that here in a second. So let's just fast forward. What we're going to do actually here is we're just going to... How should I do this? I'm just gonna... Oh, God. There's the first yawn. Been on the road since 5 a.m. this morning, so you can fuck off if you want to make fun of me for being tired. There we go. Okay. So, I have some thoughts about these games coming up. And there's a pretty big change to the bracket that I'm going to make that I think is warranted. So I'll just leave it at that. And we're going to kind of let that linger in the air for a little bit. Tomorrow night, Fiesta Bowl. Penn State, Boise State, right here. What are my thoughts on this game? Do we just start with Ashton Genty? I think we do. I think that the beginning, middle, and end of this game, from one side of the fandom's perspective, is going to be this game is Ashton Genty in all three of those phases, right? Um, and then the other side is going to be somewhat similarly oriented in like, if we stop that guy, what the fuck are you gonna do, right? Whereas if you're on the other side, it's kind of like, you guys have to stop him. Then you need to figure out what the fuck you're going to do. I think, and I said this similarly in my first round preview when I kind of was detailing all of my picks throughout the bracket. If I'm Penn State, I have to look at this kind of one way, I think. And that's, I know I'm good at run defense, but I also have to understand that objectively, this is the best running back in college football right now. Despite what you think about the level of competition he's faced, I'm here to tell you right now, I don't care what conference he's playing in, Ashton Genty would be a great running back on any team in the country against any schedule. Does that mean he has the exact same numbers he has right now? Maybe not. Hard to say. Because guess what? I'm not. And as rude as this may be for me to point out, neither the fuck are you. None of us are prophets, seers, anything of the above that can look into the future and know for certain what anything is going to be, would be, should be under any given circumstances. What I can do is look at what has occurred and tell myself, hey, there's a reason he finished second in the Heisman voting. And there's a reason he's also the number one running back on Mel Kiper's draft board. I believe he's the only running back projected to go in the first round. Don't quote me on that. I believe the last time I checked that was true. Could be changed by now. Totally worth being wrong, by the way. I suggest a lot of people try that, actually. It's really freeing to just kind of, I don't know, sit the fuck down and admit that you can be wrong every once in a while. Again, I'm willing to be wrong about this take as well. But I think that if I'm Penn State, I have to sit back and be like, hey, I'm comfortable enough in my ability to play competent defense to contain this guy. Notice I didn't say stop. This is like a team playing up against Michael Jordan. Now, I am not trying to say that Ashton Genty is the greatest college football player of all time. I'm not trying to say he's the greatest running back of all time. What I am saying is that it is very Jordan-esque in his level of dominance that he has demonstrated in his area of expertise, where if I am an opponent, yeah, there you go Broncos. If I am an opponent, I have to sit back and think, okay, I'm not going to stop Jordan from shooting 40. Or let's just say 30. I'm not going to stop him from shooting 30. But we can stop him from shooting 60, right? Like, I'm not going to limit Genty to under 100 yards from scrimmage. But I don't need to give up 200 plus. And I don't think Penn State will. So, what does that leave you with? Okay, well, I think that if I'm Penn State, I'm loading the box and daring Maddox Madsen to beat me with his arm. And if you're a Boise State fan, you probably sit back and think, okay, well, Maddox Madsen has proved himself capable enough throughout the year to do just that. It's not like we are just wholly incapable of throwing the ball, but is it going to be enough to overcome what is objectively a Penn State defense that is not, it's not going to resemble anything that Boise State has seen all year, next to maybe Oregon. And I have a really good comparison here, and I will answer your question here in just a second, George. if you want to talk about the difference between Oregon and Penn State, because a lot of Boise State fans want to point out, oh, Ashton Jeanty acquitted himself well against Oregon. I mean, it's not like Oregon was able to stop him. In terms of EPA against the rushing attack, Oregon ranks, and depending on which outlet you're looking at, these numbers differ. Oregon's 85th in the country in EPA against rushing. Penn State's 7th. Very different defenses, okay? One is way better against the rush than the other. So again, do I think that Jeanty is going to be completely useless against Penn State? No, but I think Penn State's way better at stopping the run than Oregon is. So you kind of have to look at this and be like, okay, you can't just try to game script Jeanty out, but if I'm Boise, I can't just wholly rely on him. You have to be able to answer the bell and respond in a way with Maddox Madsen and Camper and Bolt, right? Like all these great receivers that you do have. I say great, I'm trying to be nice, but like good. They're serviceable. They're not going to be first ballot Hall of Famers, but they've proven themselves capable throughout the season in key and critical moments. You need to be able to lean into that. So let's see. Do you think Penn State versus Boise State turns into a back and forth scoring fest? So for a reason you might not think, they're playing the Fiesta Bowl. It's the Arizona Cardinals Stadium, which, if you know historically, is like the slippiest turf known to mankind. I'd be looking for some chunk plays where there weren't supposed to be any. I'd look for a DB to be praying to the turf gods or tying his shoelaces when he was supposed to be in press coverage, you know, here and there. I'd definitely look for that. Haas Outdoors and Wildlife says, I have Boise State 33-31 and triple overtime just for fun. I mean, look, if we're going to go with vibes, let's just throw this out here. You've got Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl as an underdog, which historically speaking means that a game that was played when these players were in first grade might have some sort of historical meaning at play here. I don't think so, but it's fun to think of it that way. Another thing to think about is that Penn State actually has a lot of experience in the Fiesta Bowl with James Franklin, and I believe he's undefeated in the Fiesta Bowl. Don't quote me on that. I could check, but kind of have this whole unstoppable force and movable object dynamic at play here. This is my first change to the bracket, and I'm sorry to the Boise State fans. I want it to be true. I want to stay solid in my conviction, but actually, okay, you know what? I'm not going to be a coward. I'm not going to be a coward and change everything based off of what I saw in the first round. I'm going to stay true to my bracket because as it stands right now, my semifinal is still alive regardless of what happens or what happened in the first round. So I'm going to keep it. I'm just going to say that I've got my vibes leaning more Penn State after what I saw. But then again, I already talked about earlier in the video, Kevin Jennings played objectively the worst game that a college quarterback could have played in that game in Happy Valley in the first round. Do I think Maddox Madsen does the same thing? Hard to tell because, for one, it's not going to be 20-mile-an-hour wind gusts. It's not going to be in Happy Valley. It's not going to be colder than a witch's titty out there. They're going to be in a somewhat temperature-controlled dome-like environment. Whether the turf is slipperier than shit, it's somewhat irrelevant, right? Like, I think this is going to be an objectively different game in terms of just overall vibes surrounding it. Boise State also having the extra time to rest and prepare. I think that if you're smart, you want to pay a little bit close attention to both teams, but were you really paying more attention to SMU than Penn State? I don't think so. Penn had 6 Fiesta Bowl wins from 77 to 96, then 2017. Okay, then that might have been the stat I was looking at, is that Penn State itself has been exceptionally successful in Fiesta Bowls. Maybe not necessarily James Franklin. That 2017 game, by the way, was against my Washington Huskies. I don't want to talk about it. Just say I was not very impressed with Dante Pettis' decision-making at the end of the game. Anyway. like I said, I'm going to keep my pick at Boise. I think it's possible. I think anything's possible, quite frankly, in any of these games. That's kind of the mentality that I have with most college football games. Let's just say that my vibes are kind of leaning more towards Penn State. So I will actually be on my Twitch channel live tomorrow night, live reacting to that game. I can't stream the video, but I can have the audio playing depending on what I'm doing. I might be playing a different game with some friends. But I will do justice by my initial picks, and I will keep Boise State going on to the semifinals in my bracket, and I will not lean into cowardice. Next game on the docket is going to be Texas and Arizona State. All right, and I call this the Quinn Ewers with, I don't know, what do I call it? Not puppy dog eyes. It's just, I don't think Quinn Ewers, and I said this earlier when I was talking about why I initially picked Clemson to upset them in the first round. I do not like Quinn Ewers as the guy quarterback. I've seen it now 2 years in a row as a Washington fan playing against him in the postseason. He is a guy that came out of high school with a lot of tools and a lot of raw talent that it took a trip from Ohio State to then Texas to become the starter there, and then to sort of underachieve under Steve Sarkisian. I mean, yes, he has the road win against Bama, but then they play super close games against Kansas State, and then they get to the playoff, and it's just throwing air balls that should have been on a rope to Isaiah Bond in the corner of the end zone. It wasn't Isaiah Bond. Who's the guy that transferred to... oh, God. Don't tell me. It's going to drive me crazy. Did he transfer to Georgia? This is going to bug me now. He was getting super pissed because he wasn't getting targets. He literally called his own number and got a touchdown late in the game. And then he was the intended target on the last play where Elijah Jackson swatted the ball. Either way, the pass from Quinn Ewers was interesting to say the least. Granted, he's getting pressured as he delivers the ball, but to not even try to put some juice on it and just loft it in the air and basically a back shoulder fade into the end zone, it's like, what did you think was going to happen? And you kind of see it in his face too. Like he just kind of like lifts his helmet up and he's just kind of looking like in somewhat disbelief, like, yeah, I really fucked that up, didn't I? You know? But then you go into this year and it's like, okay, Sark, what is he? He's the screen wizard, right? Like everybody knows what to expect from that offense. And I think Sark is still an exceptional play caller. It's just in those moments where you kind of have to open the bag and be more aggressive with your play calling. I don't think Quinn Ewers is the guy that I want there. Now, here's where I kind of have to like push back against Texas fans because it's like, they're like, okay, well, obviously we have to go to Quinn Ewers, right? And it's or to Arch Manning. And it's like Arch Manning can throw the ball. I think he's got a little bit more of a gamer in him, but he's still inexperienced, right? Like he doesn't have a wealth of experience at the college level. And what really makes him scary is something that you've kind of needed for quite some time, and that's his legs. So think about this. What team has given Texas the most fits this year? Well, it's only one, and it's Georgia. Well, what are the teams that have done really well against Georgia? Alabama, Georgia Tech, Ole Miss. Okay. What are those three teams? Well, I guess we'll count the Kentucky game, but what do a lot of those teams have in common? Well, in Ole Miss, you have elite defense paired with elite playmakers on offense. So that's just kind of like a roster for roster butting head situation. Alabama, somewhat similar, but I think the thing that really set them apart from other teams and then that makes them similar to Georgia Tech is you have Jalen Milroe and Haynes King, very capable dual threat quarterbacks. I think Milroe might give him a slight edge in the passing department, which is not much, to say the least, over Haynes King. But we saw Brett Key and Georgia Tech really dial up a beautiful scheme for a majority of that game that was like, hey, we are going to stress this Georgia defense as much as we possibly can and hope that it's enough to hang on. Whereas Bama was just like, we have the talent. We don't have to hang on per se. Like, we just need to be able to go blow for blow and beat you with something that you're not well equipped to stop. And that was one, Jalen Milroe being a freak athlete, and then two, Ryan Williams also being a freak athlete. And oh, did I mention he's 17 years old? But anyway, sorry, let me get to the chat here. So I've been watching a ton of predictions. I found everyone's regurgitating the same talking points, but it seems like you were talking about a few new things. Yeah, thanks, man. I don't want to say I'm like a fringe predictor or anything like that, but like I like to exist in a world somewhere between like data points and vibes, if that makes sense. I don't like just looking at stat sheets and regurgitating them and then using that to like fortify my beliefs. Like I have to kind of like, I watch a lot of football and I want to be able to like look at the University of Georgia team that I've seen play this year, then look at the stat sheet and kind of draw some correlation between the two and see what my mind comes up with. And then I just sort of word soup it together to the best of my ability and see what happens. So that said, let's go to Texas and Arizona State. I think that all of my qualms about Quinn Ewers aside, I think the one aspect of the Texas team that you can't really relegate or dismiss is the defense. The defense is objectively amazing. And I guess going back to the Clemson game, if there's one more like, flower that I can, or rose that I can give to Clemson, it's that from week one where you got absolutely decimated by a Georgia team that I think is on par defensively with Texas, to what you were able to do against Texas in the first round game. Massive props to Dabo Swinney, Cade Klubnik, that offensive staff for being able to sort of realize their potential and at least acquit themselves well against a defense that I just really think is like top five in the country. Sorry. And the stats obviously back that up. But, anywho, Arizona State might be the worst defense left in the playoff. Either them or Boise State, depending on which stats you really think are most important. I think that if you look at explosive play rate given up, Arizona State, it's either Arizona State or Boise State that's worst. I honestly can't remember which one it is just off the top of my head, but they're both not great in that department. And then you have basically Arizona State team that loves to give up scores in the red zone. Like they have one of the worst red zone defenses in the country, going up against Texas, who has terrible red zone success rate on offense. So instead of like the unstoppable force and movable object fight that we were having before with the Penn State defense and Ashton Genty at running back, now you kind of have like derp on derp meeting in the middle here, with the Arizona State red zone defense and the Texas red zone offense. And then to kind of flip the two now, looking at Arizona on offense and then Texas on defense, you have a Texas defense that hasn't really exhibited a whole lot of weaknesses unless your name is the University of Georgia. And then you have Arizona State with the angry ball of knives that is Cam Scatterbo at running back. I mean, the dude's head looks like a Lego piece. He was like made for one thing, and that was just to strap on shoulder pads and run over smaller humans and larger humans, and like maybe just like, I don't know, deciduous wildlife somewhere in the Alaska and wilderness. Like I don't know. Kid's nuts, and you just like look him in the eyes, and it's just like, does he have emotion? Like, I don't understand what's happening here. It's kind of freaky. There's some it looks like freaking oh god, what the hell's the dad's name from the Croods? Oh my god, I should bring that up. Hang on. I hope I don't get fucking like in trouble for this. I shouldn't, right? That'd be pretty fucking lame. Oh, what is it? Grug? That's his fucking name. Oh my god. This is mean. This is somewhat mean spirited. Not gonna lie. So we've got Grug here. I mean, like, have you have you seen the two of them in the same room together before? Because like, okay, that was mean. That was mean. I acknowledge that. But if there's anybody that I don't want to fucking line up against, it's got to be Grug, right? This man carried his family through a volcanic cataclysm and saw them across some chasm. You literally just shot put them one by one to safety. And I gotta think Cam Scadaboo's thinking the same way about carrying Arizona State's playoff hopes. So I mean, you see the bracket. Like, I've got Grug going all the way to the semis against Ohio State. So um realistically speaking, I think a lot of people are going to keep using the same talking point of like, is Arizona State going to be one dimensional with Cam Scadaboo, much in the way a lot of people think Boise State's going to be one dimensional with Ashton Genty. I think a lot of people that say that haven't watched him play. I think that Sam Levitt at quarterback is more than effective at his position. I think that he is a good distributor of the ball. I understand that Jordan Tyson, his number one weapon, is injured with a broken collarbone. If you watch the Big 12 championship game, Xavier Guillory had 2 touchdown passes himself in that game. Cam Scadaboo gets way more involved in the passing game than Ashton Genty does comparatively. I think Arizona State is going to come. Hang on. I want to rewind, and I want to say this with a little bit like different cadence because I don't want it to be delivered so aggressively. I think that much in the way people are asking if Boise State can acquit themselves well enough in the passing game to counteract the level of dedication that Penn State is going to have in stopping Ashton Genty, I think Arizona State is going to come better prepared to have a game plan that is not so Cam Scadaboo centric. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he won't be targeted in that game plan a majority of the time. I just don't think that it is just going to be handball off to Cam, let him go bully people in the trenches. I think that they are going to kind of Tyler Warren him the way that Penn State does. And they are going to use him to give Texas's defenses looks to set up other playmakers for their offense. Now, Boise State could easily do the same thing. I just think that Texas's defense statistically is lauded as being one of the best in the country. And I don't want to necessarily say that they aren't, because I've already said that I think they are. But I can't argue the fact that outside of the Georgia game, they might be the least tested, talented defense in the playoff, if that makes sense. Like, I think Penn State's been tested. I think Oregon's been tested. I think Ohio State's been tested. Georgia has absolutely been tested. So if I had to pick 2 defenses that I think have been least tested in terms of what I believe to be truly talented defenses in this playoff, my top 2 picks are probably of the alive field are Texas and Notre Dame, because Boise and Arizona State are the 2 worst defenses, and the gap between them and the rest of the field is rather large. Like, the rest of the field has like pretty outstanding defense compared to the rest of the country, whereas Boise State and Arizona State are a bit of outliers. And I know I said earlier, like, Oregon's EPA against the rush is like 85th. That is one stat piece for what ends up making up a greater part of a whole defense, right? So I don't want to necessarily make that like seem like I think Oregon's defense isn't good. That's not necessarily true. So anyway, back to the Texas things. Like, I think Arizona's going to come better prepared, but I also think it has a lot to do with the coaching staff too. I think that their young coach Kenny Dillingham is, for one, just absolute psychopath. I mean, if you've ever seen the guy on the sidelines or like watched an interview with him, he's like the graduate assistant that was doing blow in the locker room with the players before the game, and then woke up one morning as a freaking offensive analyst and was like, "Hey man, we're riding these fucking vibes all the way to the bank. I don't care how I got here. Let's fucking roll." All right. And he has just been like that, just like consistently just cashing checks all the way till head coaching status. And he's sitting around. He's like, bet, let's go. Like, let's like that is just like the energy that he brings to it. No, I don't actually think Kenny Dillingham was doing cocaine with his players. Like, settle down. But like, that's literally the energy that he brings to it. Like, he's a wild man. Like, you look at the energy he brings to the sideline. I think he's going to be in his bag. And I think that, to give you a comparison to what I think he's going to be, that a team in this playoff wasn't, I think that if you look at the way Indiana sort of laid down against Notre Dame late in that game, Arizona State is going to be that team that is going to be chewing on your ankles all the way to the locker room, fighting for every last blade of grass that they can try to take over on that field, even if it's in a losing effort. Like, I think that Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils, even if they lose by 3 touchdowns, they're going to be in the locker room when the clock hits triple zeros, and they're going to look themselves dead in the eyes and say with absolute certainty, we did absolutely fucking everything that we could to win this game. Whereas I do not think Indiana can say that. And that is the kind of energy that I think they're going to bring to this game, along with what I think they are capable of that people aren't giving them credit for outside of Cam Scatabo, that could propel them over Texas. And again, I reside somewhere between vibes and stats, and that is bringing me to a more vibesy leaning pick in Arizona State here. Also, just, I don't want to see the usual suspects continue to go. I want to see some fresh blood insert themselves into the national conversation. I want to see an Arizona State team that won the Big 12 in their first year in the conference. Meanwhile, Texas was in the Big 12 for 27 years and only had 4 conference titles. Like, come on. I'm here for it. We're going to have fun. Haas, do you think they should change what has worked or just add a few new things? Are you talking about Boise or ASU? Because I think that my answer is somewhat similar for both teams, quite frankly. So I think I'll just kind of lay that out. I think if you're Boise, you don't try to get away from Ashton Genty. I think that in some of their bigger games this season, we've seen him implemented in the passing game. I'd like to see them lean into that a little bit more against Penn State. I don't necessarily know if they want to be as quote unquote toolsy with him in the way that I think Arizona State could be with Cam Scatabo. And what I mean by that is, like, when I reference the whole Tyler Warrening of Cam Scatabo, I don't believe the same thing is going to work against Penn State's defense. Not that I think Texas's defense is inept enough. I think that the way that Pete Kwiatkowski coaches his defense, I'm very familiar with him. He was our defensive coordinator at Washington for many years. I think the way that he coaches is his defense is very linebacker driven. And that should come as no surprise. It's literally front 7, right? And so you have to win by displacing them and getting them out of alignment. Like, you have to give them a look that is going to challenge their initial call or play set, and essentially put yourself in a position where either A, you force the defense to declare itself before the snap, right? Or B, you force them into an audible that actually sets up what you were trying to do in the first place. Right? Like, you were intentionally trying to, like, kind of read before the snap and be like, okay, if we put Cam here, that's going to lead them to do this, which is actually going to open up this other thing. Or maybe they call your bluff and you're not bluffing, and it was actually intended for Cam the whole way. Like, that's kind of what I think that you can do. Whereas I don't think Genty has like the Tyler Warren in him. Like, Genty is very much so one of those guys where it's like, it's not that he can't be a receiving threat, but he's very much so one of those, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, he is just an absolute amazing running back, and like, teams have been stacking the box against him all year. They haven't been able to stop him. Whereas where Cam Scottaboo excels, like Genty has a lot of finesse in the brutality that he possesses, whereas Cam Scottaboo is like pure D-ball, running through people, shanking them between the rib cages as he runs, and just betting on himself being more physical than the defenders he runs into. Whereas Genty very much so possesses elite vision, elite cutting ability. Like he's going to read a hole and he's going to hit it with a burst that a lot of running backs would kill for. And I think that if you try to get him enabled in the passing game, you have to change some things about your own offensive alignment that set him up to do that. You don't necessarily have to use him as the cornerstone to get the defense looking a certain direction, because I think Penn State, their defensive line, might be crazy to say this, quite frankly, but I think that their front four way more effective than Texas's at disrupting the line of scrimmage for the opposing offense, because their linebackers are great too, but if I'm banking on their linebackers being out of position, it's not going to matter all that much, because most offenses don't have time to wait for that linebacker to make the mistake or commit to the bad read before Deni Dennis Sutton or Abdul Carter are eating their quarterback's lunch in the backfield. Whereas, not that Texas lacks pass rush, it's just they are not as successful in the way that I've seen Penn State be. I hope that answered your question. Like I think that they need to do things a little bit differently than they have in order to see success against both of these teams, respectively. I just think that the way they think they do things differently needs to be more extreme for Arizona State than it does for Boise, quite frankly. I think Boise's path to success is to lean into what has been successful while adding some tweaks here and there to set Genty up for success or open up plays for guys like Camper and Bolt, or Louder, right? Whereas I think Arizona State needs to turn Scatabo or lean more heavily into the Scatabo is Tyler Warren for Penn State kind of play, where we need to start putting him in positions that is going to challenge the way this Pete Kwiatkowski defense plays. Whereas the way the Penn State defense is it's not that they don't necessarily have schemes drawn up for their second and third levels. It's just a lot of their defense is focused around our front four are better than anything you're going to put in front of us. And with the exception of Oregon, they've proven that, right? And it wasn't that they were completely unsuccessful against Oregon. It's just that player for player, Oregon was able to weather the storm way better than anybody else they've played. So anyway, Arizona State vibes. Next game, Ohio State, Oregon. Rematch of the regular season matchup. I, as a Washington human, obviously have a dog in this fight. Which is also to say that I have no dogs in this fight, because sad day, we didn't make the playoff again this year because we lost 11 bajillion players to the fucking portal and NFL draft last year. But hey, next year should be better. We'll see. Took a union mandated sip there. Hang on. I think I've done it well so far of not just sort of shitting on Oregon because I want to. I will continue to be as objective as I possibly can. This game's going to be a banger. Again, even what we saw from Ohio State against Tennessee, I think that Ohio State is absolutely going to be coming forward with its A game. But I think Oregon is too. Oregon's going to have had just as much time to rest and prepare for this game as Ohio State did for the Tennessee game. I don't think Dan Lanning, a lot of people have talked about rust. I don't think Dan Lanning would ever let a team coached by him to fall victim to such a thing. And that's even assuming that I believe it exists in the first place, right? I'm trying to think, like, what was the longest layoff I ever had between playing outside of being injured, which there's rust associated with that, but it's not necessarily rust. Like, there's actual, like, I wasn't playing football, in the time between snaps. I guess like the closest thing I can really think of is like going from like, being in the postseason and then obviously training camp and everything like that. And then you show up for your first game of the year or the next year and it's kind of one of those like, okay, this is what I've been preparing for. Let's see what the fuck it looks like, right? Whereas that's not where Oregon's at. Like, they are a somewhat finished product. They're not at the end of their journey. Obviously not at the end of the journey that, or the end that they want to be at, right? But they've played a shit ton of football already. So it's not like they have to sit back and be like, man, I wonder what it's going to look like when we play Ohio State, because they've done it before. Or just, I wonder what it's going to look like to play football again after 3 weeks. And it's like, you've got how many weeks of football already under your belt this year? I don't really think that whole rest thing applies. So what do I think we're going to get? I think a lot of people are going to look at the first matchup and see an Oregon offense that took the top off of Ohio State's defense, namely Evan Stewart picking on Denzel Burke at corner, and exercising a downfield passing attack that Oregon really hasn't replicated at all this season, to the degree that they did against Ohio State. I have questions about that. I have a question. One is, was Ohio State expecting it, number one, and then is Oregon going to be able to replicate that, number two, right? That's like one side of it, okay? And then B, was it, okay, Ohio State was actually prepared for it, and they couldn't stop it, and is Oregon going to continue to attack that because they know that Denzel Burke is susceptible in that area? And then there's like the rare third end of like, okay, Ohio State wasn't expecting it. Now they are. Is Oregon even going to go back to that well? Because you have to think, right? Like, if I'm Oregon and I'm going back and I'm reviewing tape and I'm watching, like, man, Evan really carved up Denzel Burke deep down the field. Do I just think that Ohio State's going to allow that to happen again? I'd hope not. I hope that, like, I hope if I'm Oregon, I give them those looks and their defense responds by declaring appropriately to suggest that they are expecting and or wary of the downfield passing attack. And then what do? Oh, I don't know, like, go underneath, which last time I checked, with Tez Johnson and Terrence Ferguson, Kenyon Sadiq, Jordan James, not Kyron Hudson. Kyron Hudson's a Washington State receiver that used to play for Oregon. Traceon Holden. I'm going to, what was that thing again? I'm going to attack underneath. We've been the best offense at that all year, next to maybe Texas. Actually, I'll go ahead and say it as a fucking Washington Huskies fan. The Oregon Ducks are the best mid to short range passing offense in the country this year with those playmakers. If I'm Evan Stewart, I'm a little poopy butt because I've had really one game where I've been like actually relied upon to do the thing that I am elite at. Meanwhile, it's just been a check down assassin type offense with Dylan Gabriel under center from this offense all year. So it's like, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't if you're Ohio State, because it's like, okay, if I overcommit to trying to stop what I know they're excellent at, can I dedicate enough resources? Can I be prepared enough to stop them from doing exactly what they did last time? I don't know. I legitimately don't know, because the players haven't changed. The talent hasn't changed. So like, what really changes schematically? Because you have this one data point against you. It's not even against another team. Like, you can't even just like analyze film and be like, we can do that better than them. It's like, motherfucker, that is you. Like, they did it to you. And only you, really. Not to say that Evan Stewart has done nothing else the rest of the year against other teams, but in terms of the way that they executed that game plan, Ohio State is the lone data point. And if you're Oregon, you fucking love that, because you're like, hey, motherfucker, like, could we maybe have done that the rest of the year? Sure. Did we have to? No, we didn't. And now if you're Ohio State, you're sitting back there and you're just kind of like, motherfuck, like, what am I supposed to do with this information? Because we just came off of a game against what was supposed to be a great defense, what was supposed to be a great team in general, right? And we dominated them because, again, we drove the Ferrari like a Ferrari is supposed to be driven. Well, guess what? They've got a Bugatti. Okay? So now what do you what do you want to what do you want me to do with that information? Do you want me to go Ferrari against Bugatti again, do the exact same thing we did last time and hope that it works out in our favor? Well, let's look at what happened. You lost by 1 point on the road by a literal second. If Will Howard slides a second earlier, you get the timeout off, you give yourself a chance to kick the ball, you probably win that game. And if you're an Oregon fan, you probably hear me say that and think like, yeah, that's literally what everybody else has been fucking saying. But guess what, you revisionist prick? We can't go back in time and change it. The result was the result. And you don't know if the kicker would have made the kick. All these things are absolutely true. I hear you loud and clear, Oregon fans. Like, you can't go back and change that. But also, if I'm Ohio State, is that really what I want to hang my hat on? A 1 point in 1 second shift? Like, and you want to talk about the 12th man on the field shenanigans, and was it OPI? I think it was OPI. Okay, normally I would look purple tinted glasses and just say it was a bullshit flag. Ohio State got screwed. No, it was a close game that Ohio State could have won, but they didn't. As a fucking ball coach, how do you step away from that and say, that's enough for me to feel comfortable about this game moving forward? That we had 1 second and 1 point. That's not enough of a shift for me to go into the Rose Bowl, which is still on their side of the country. They're going to have a massive showing in terms of fan base. So it's not like it's going to be, a true neutral site game. I mean, I think it's going to be a decent 50-50 split, because Ohio State's not exactly a stranger to the Rose Bowl. But do I go into that game thinking I saw enough from the first one that we're going to be able to change the outcome of this game? I don't know. I think if you're Ohio State, you're probably hoping that Oregon doesn't show up with their A game, that rust is actually a factor, and I'm full of shit, right? Because objectively speaking, the data points that you do have to try and improve off of, it's not great. Like, because also looking at yourself offensively, it's not that you played bad. I mean, you played great. Like, both teams hung 30 plus points on one another. That's a pretty good fucking showing offensively for either team against two defenses that rank in the top 10 in the country. So from an offensive standpoint for both teams, it's like, if you're Oregon, you're kind of like, we don't have to change much, but if we are going to change anything, we're going to change it because we're going to see you overcommitting to something that you expect to be happening based off of the previous result. And if you're Ohio State, it's kind of like, well, we let the Ferrari out of the garage. Let's just let the Ferrari out of the garage again. Or if you're Oregon, you're like, well, you kind of did that against us last time, and we were still able to win in a shootout. So I like our odds. I think we are battle tested in that regard. Doesn't mean we can't lose. It just means that in that scenario, I think Ohio State's sweating way more than Oregon is. But yeah, I'm not picking the Ducks. Fuck them. Ohio State's going to win. Oh, let's see. I'll cover your Huskies. This 12-team playoff will hopefully allow more teams to get exposure, which will cause better recruitment. I mean, we're actually already kind of cooking in the transfer portal. We got a former 5-star receiver out of Texas 2 days ago. We're actually a top 10 portal team right now this offseason. Plus high school recruiting has actually seen an improvement coming from DeBoer moving on to Jedfish. So I'm hopeful, I mean, I think I got a little bit too hopeful for what this season could have been. But I'm very much so in the kind of like prove it phase with this coaching staff of like, hey, like I like what I'm seeing in recruiting. I just need to see it on the field now. There's been little sparks here and there. Thank you for getting revenge against Michigan. Please don't lose to Oregon again. And also Rutgers and Indiana and Washington State. Can we just like not lose as much? I don't know. Is that too much to ask? Oregon has always been super fast, and this year they are way more physical. I think they were physical last year, quite frankly. I think that just a lot of people underestimated how physical Washington was going to be up against them. I mean, you look at the way that they played every other team on their schedule, they absolutely bullied them. I think that they made some key additions in the defensive line with Derek Harmon, and there's one other guy whose name fails me right now. I think that they made additions up front that are ridiculous for them, that have definitely taken that defensive line to another level. But I don't think it's like drastically different from last year. I think honestly they're less explosive than they were last year in terms of pushing the ball down the field. They're extremely efficient like they were last year, but it's a little bit more dink and dunk and just kind of carving you up in a way where you can't stop them. And then defensively, like you said, they're way more physical, and especially in the defensive line. Yep, I think it's going to be a legit game, George. I am going to be here for it. Absolutely. I'm hoping for a super good game, but I was hoping for that with BYU versus Buffaloes. I think I got the result I wanted with BYU Colorado. Just been kind of exhausted with the Dion show. Like, I think objectively, I think I've said objectively a lot this fucking podcast. Should probably reel that in a little bit. No, I think that Shedeur and Travis are phenomenal players, and they have a league future. Absolutely. I just think that a team is way more than two players. And quite frankly, I think there's aspects of that team that should be more highlighted than two players, or three if you count Shiloh in that. That I think if more attention and resources were dedicated to other members of that team, might have a better result than you've gotten. But that's why I'm sitting in my house on a measly military salary. Anyway, one more game to preview. This is the nightcap. 8:45 kickoff. Oh, sorry, 7:45 kickoff for me. It'll be 6:45 Eastern. Do I have that right? I don't think I do. I think it's 9:45 Eastern. Do. Checking the motherfucking scores. Yeah, so it'll be 8:45 Eastern. So you can see the bracket. George, you see it. I already said earlier that I wasn't going to change or waver from my initial predictions, but this is my other change that I was going to make. When I initially did my preview video for the full playoff, it was shortly after conference championship week. And so I had just watched Georgia play. And what I saw, and also what's actually been reported, is I saw a team that rallied to Gunnar Stockton in a way that they hadn't been for Carson Beck. And I think most people see a starting quarterback go down for a team, and you think that drastically changes a team's trajectory. I agree still. I think this team, for whatever reason, is going to play harder for Gunnar Stockton than they did for Carson Beck. And that's because even Kirby Smart has been quoted as saying things similar to that leading up to this game. Now, what does that have to do with the price of rice in China? Hard to say, because you cannot get away from the fact that this will be the first game that Gunnar Stockton starts under quarterback for the University of Georgia. It doesn't change the fact that in spite of what we saw the defense do in the second half against Texas, the offense, though able to score, he also made some boneheaded decisions as a young quarterback does, right? He also got sent to the shadow realm by one of Texas's DBs and lived to tell the tale. I think this boils down to something, and I said earlier in the show that I was going to get to this point, and I'm really glad that we are now. What this game's going to boil down to is the difference between what people think Georgia's capable of versus what Georgia actually shows up to play. Because if we're just talking about depth, from a depth point of view or perspective, whatever you want to call it, Georgia is by far the greater roster. But if we go starter for starter, Notre Dame against Georgia, I don't think the gap is as big as people think it is. And by people, I mean Georgia fans. Or should we just say SEC fans in general? like, or maybe just college football fans in general. The average or casual fan probably sees this matchup, thinks of Notre Dame teams of the past, thinks of Georgia teams of the past, and thinks in their own mindset, or their own mind's eye, rather, that, oh, Notre Dame's going to get rolled. Well, why do you think that? Have you actually watched the two teams play this year? I said this earlier in the video that, like, I want to judge a team based off of what I've seen and then go and look at the numbers. So I like the idea of Gunner having a good game, but I really don't want BSU to have to play Georgia. So when I did my initial preview video, which I, unfortunately, for reasons unbeknownst to you guys, but known to me, aka I'm a retarded idiot, I didn't actually upload my preview video that I did for the first round. I said this, that when I had Boise State going all the way to the semis, that the Cinderella story would end here. There was going to be a level of vibes and energy that Boise State was going to lean into to take down a team like Penn State, that I thought that once they ran into a team like Georgia, it was going to come to an end there. It was going to be one of those where I don't care how good you feel about yourself. I don't care what the vibes are in the locker room. It's just I don't see you being able to overcome what Georgia's going to bring to the table. And I've had to sit back on that and think really long and hard. Do I actually think that this is that Georgia team? Where's the game? Where's the game on the schedule against a team not named Texas that tells me that that Georgia team exists somewhere in here? I'll wait. When was the last time the Georgia Bulldogs played a full 4 quarters of football like the Georgia Bulldogs should play football? I can answer that question way easier for the University of Notre Dame than I can about the University of Georgia. That should be where the preview ends, right? I've seen way more sample size from Notre Dame throughout the back 3 quarters of the season telling me that's a team that knows who it is, has an identity, has a style of play that it commits to, and delivers on a consistent basis week to week with little to no hiccups. Whereas Georgia has the Kentucky game, has the Bama game, has the Ole Miss game, has the Georgia Tech game, has the first half of the Texas game in the SEC championship game. Notre Dame has Northern Illinois. That was week 2. It's a lot of weeks between then and now that tell me that that Notre Dame team is way better equipped to play a consistent game of football than the University of Georgia Bulldogs. And the more that I've kind of come around to that is why I kind of want to change my pick. I mean, Georgia's only a slight favorite right now. I believe it's 2.5 point spread on a neutral field, which means that on a home field, we're still at under a touchdown. Do I really think Arizona State is going to beat Texas? I assume you weren't here for the actual breakdown of this. That's very much so a vibesy pick. I think that Arizona State is the worst defense. I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. I think Arizona State is the worst defense left in the playoff. I think that Texas has the defense to stop every single team in this field if they're firing on all cylinders. What I really question is Quinn Ewers at quarterback. I think what's between the ears there is inconsistent enough for me to see a team like Arizona State with Kenny Dillingham and the psychotic coke fueled rage that he's going to bring to the sideline. I see if there's going to be an upset here, and yes, I see that I've got Boise State going on to the semis. We're literally just talking about how that side of the bracket, I wanted to change both my picks for it, so please try and keep up. Of the 4 games that are coming up over the next 48 hours, if I have to put my mortgage and already beat 4 playoff teams. Georgia beat Texas, Tennessee, Clemson. Who's the 4th? Am I an Ohio State fan? I can see somebody has arrived very late to the party. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. So they beat 3 playoff teams. They just beat one of them twice. Anyway, brother, if I have to look at the University of Washington flag hanging behind me one more time, I don't know. Find God. Moving on. So, going back to the Notre Dame Georgia conversation, do I think that I'm willing to stick true to my pick and say that the vibes that I got from the second half of the SEC championship game are enough for me to say that this Georgia team is going to show up, play their hearts out for Gunnar Stockton, and overcome what should be, under all normal football circumstances, a deficit at the quarterback position. I mean, look, I don't give a damn what stars they got coming out of high school. There's no fucking universe where any team that has had one guy under center for every single game of the season has a brand new starter going into a quarterfinal playoff game, and you're going to sit here and tell me that team's better with him. And you can say that with 100% certainty. If you legitimately believe that, I have a few psychiatrist friends of mine that I'd happily refer you to, because stop it. Get help. That is not a sane or level-headed take. That is just as vibesy as me picking Arizona State over Texas, because it is based in zero fact, verifiable or otherwise. So, anywho, I want to change my pick to Notre Dame. I did say earlier in the video, I'm going to stay true. I'm not going to alter the bracket. Just know where I'm leaning now. This Georgia team has played 53 games this season. That's wild. I didn't realize they could fit that. Oh, wait. This Georgia team has only played the games that this Georgia team has played, and I should in no way, shape, or form base this Georgia team and their performances off of anything that any team, whether it was Western Kentucky State Penitentiary, University of Pennsylvania, or Georgia for that matter, I should base their performances this year off of nothing that has happened outside of this fucking calendar year. Full stop. End of conversation. Not interested in this. If that is what you base your assumptions of teams on, you are not a serious person and do not deserve serious discourse from me. Go find another channel. I'm sure you'll find somebody worthy of puffing up your ego. Please see yourself out. I think the defense is absolutely capable of rallying, because I've seen that. The question is the offense going to be able to do enough against the Notre Dame defense that is actually excellent? Right? Like, that's the thing. We can sit here and say, like, Georgia's defense can rally. We've seen it. Have we seen it consistently? No. No, we haven't. You go find me the full 4 quarters of defense that Georgia has played every single game this year. Like, show me it. Go show me. Show me all the games that Georgia's played this year and point out each and every single individual one where they have played a full 4 quarters of football on the defensive side of the ball the way that the University of Georgia Bulldogs should be playing defense. I'll wait. They haven't. So the fact that they haven't means that they very well might not right here. Yes? Are we in agreement? Probably not, Mike G. But I also know I'm not going to change your mind. You don't want this smoke, dude. Trust me. I got time. Sip of the chalice. So anyway, do I think Georgia's defense can show up and play their A game? Absolutely, I do. Do I have supreme confidence that they're going to do it? No. Because again, they have proven themselves equally capable of not doing it this year. So if Notre Dame is able to protect the football, generate enough efficiency on offense to at least put some points on the board, well, now the calculus gets really simple if you're Notre Dame. You have to rely on your defense that has been objectively great to stop an offense quarterbacked now by Gunnar Stockton, not Carson Beck, to be enough to score points against you. Now, between Arian Smith and his 36 drops this year, ETN, when healthy, has been serviceable as a weapon, but that's also a smaller sample size because he has spent a good part of the season injured. Nate Frazier, true freshman, very, very promising, good talent. Again, not as much consistency and generating, success in the running game. Who else? Oscar Delp. Yeah, I think I've seen one or two really good games from him this year. Maybe one or two good plays a game, if that. Ben Urasek, transfer from Stanford. Largely been irrelevant in the offense, except for, as a blocking tight end, which is great. Tight ends need to be good at that. Do I need to supply any more names to prove to you that I actually know a lot about your team, buddy? How do I think the loss of Riley Mills factors? Well, his backup has been a rotational piece all season. He's never played more than 30 snaps a game, if I remember correctly. So obviously his production, what's going to be asked of him, is going to increase significantly. But to sit here and say that he's wholly incapable, I think is not accurate. But again, you're kind of like losing Carson Beck. I'm not going to look at Riley Mills' backup and say there's going to be zero drop-off, right? I think that if I'm Georgia with a healthy ETN, with Nate Frazier, who's shown flashes, you'd have to be crazy to not test it out and be like, that guy right there, he doesn't look like their first-round draft pick defensive tackle. Let's run at him. See what happens, right? I think Georgia's going to try it. I think they'd be stupid not to. And if they find success in it, they'd be stupid to get away from it. I just think that I have a little bit more faith given the fact that it's not like you're putting some bright-eyed and bushy-tailed true freshman in there. No, this guy's a freaking redshirt junior, if I remember correctly, who has seen a lot of play this year and been very good in the play that he has seen, if not as consistent or extensive as Riley Mills. I think it's going to be enough. I think a better question is going to be who's the rotational piece in behind him, and is that going to be a piece capable of weathering the storm that I think Georgia is capable of producing physically? Because again, if this is a rocks and knives football game that I think it's going to be, Georgia doesn't necessarily need Gunnar Stockton to put on, blue tights and a fucking red cape and propel them to victory. They just need to be the way that they were against Texas, where it's like they're coming off the Bama game where they really exhibited a lot of flaws and needed a lot of hero work from Carson Beck to come back in that game. They showed up in the Texas game, and the Georgia team that I saw there was one that was just like, look, man, we're bigger than you. We're more physical. We're better athletes, and we're just going to bully you, and we're going to attack Quinn Ewers all day because when he sees bright lights, he doesn't know what to do about it. There is a version of Georgia that could show up and do that. Absolutely. There's a version of Georgia in there that shows up defensively and renders Riley Leonard without legs, with legs, better at passing throughout the year, maybe a little bit of a paper tiger and hasn't actually improved as much as we've seen him against the competition, because what competition have they actually played? That whole narrative, right? All of that exists, right? Like the cultural zeitgeist of this game is so multi-layered with possibility. I love it. I think outside of the Ohio State-Oregon game, this is the game I'm most excited for. And I really can't tell which one I'm more excited for, because if I think about physical brands of football, I think all four of those teams exhibit it. It's really just a question of which flavor am I going to be craving tomorrow night? Or sorry, freaking Wednesday night. Like, am I going to be craving the old school freaking 3 yards in a cloud of dust game that I kind of expect Notre Dame and Georgia to play? Or am I craving the, like, we have so much talent on both sides of the ball, it's really just going to be a star-studded affair, more like what you would expect to see, like, between two great NFL teams late in the playoffs or something like that. Yeah, I think that if I have to look at it objectively, Notre Dame should win this game because Georgia, in spite of all that talent they do have, has not demonstrated with enough consistency to me this year that level of Georgia is going to show up every single week. Whereas Notre Dame, outside of the Northern Illinois game, has demonstrated consistent improvement and actually demonstrated the existence of an identity in football that tells me, like, hey, I know what this team is. I know what they're capable of. I know what they're going to try to do. Can they go execute it against a roster that is equally talented to them, starter for starter? Not depth for depth. Mike G, if you're still here, maybe missed that part too. All right. Because if we're talking about depth for depth, Georgia obviously has the better roster. But starter for starter, the gap between Notre Dame and Georgia isn't as big as you think it is. I don't care what you say. It's not as big as you think it is. Okay? Notre Dame has multiple first-round guys projected just like Georgia does. Maybe not as many as Georgia. I don't really fucking care. Go argue with the fucking air. So anyway, that's my preview of the second round. Like I said, the big changes from the bracket being is I think Penn State and Notre Dame get it done instead of Boise and Georgia. And there's a world where I see my initial prediction coming true as well. There's a world where I see Texas beating Arizona or Arizona State, and it's not even close. There's a world where I see Oregon beating Ohio State. I mean, I've trotted out potentials for every single team. This is just kind of my, yeah, that's what I got, you know? And if that doesn't vibe with your particular flavor of college football, well, then guess what? There's plenty of more well-resourced channels with, you know, powdered-faced fucking assholes that you can go listen to that aren't named me. And I'm sure there's plenty of dudes that'll go suckle the taint of SEC teams and make you feel really good about yourself inside. Matter of fact, I know there's plenty of channels that'll do that. I could give you some references if you'd like, because if you ended up finding me, I can only imagine the thirst you must have for attention for your Georgia Bulldogs. Really looking under every single rock, aren't we? So, if I want to give like a brief preview of like my existing predictions versus like the changes that I kind of gave, I still think that even with the Penn State Notre Dame outcome, I think the only thing I would change is that I would have it as an Ohio State Notre Dame title game. But I could also see that Ohio State Penn State in a Big Ten matchup. That said, you know, I want to believe that this playoff system is going to end up showcasing what it was intended to do, or should I say, what the fans think it's intended to do, some fans, because what it was really intended to do was to generate revenue for the bigger conferences, right? You know, everybody's been arguing about SEC representation, even in the 4-team, right? Or, you know, bias this way or the other. Look, I'm going to make it really simple for you. There's a reason the ACC and the SEC only play 8 conference games, okay? It's not because they're scared. It's because their conference offices want them to have as much representation in the postseason as possible. Why? Because the more teams make it to bowl games, the more money the conference makes. And while there are a handful of teams from each conference that do schedule some hard out-of-conference schedules, more often than not, you got teams that are playing Southwest Jacksonville State University and the Furman College of fucking Blueberry Bagels in one season. And what does that do? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Those 2 wins count towards bowl eligibility, which means that in conference play or the remaining of your out-of-conference schedule, you only got to win 4 games, and then you can go to the postseason and make money for your conference. That's why they fucking do it. It has absolutely nothing to do with anybody being scared, this, that, or the other. It is all about cash grab. And then guess what? In the playoff, they get even more money for the more teams that they have represented in the postseason there. So that's why they did it. Capiche? Capiche. All right. So to think that there's some sort of underlying cynical nature to this whole thing that's like they don't actually think these teams can compete. They don't give a fuck if they think they can compete or not. They are going to say whatever they have to justify their ends to get as much representation in here because they don't give a fuck about the football. There, I said it. The people that are in charge of the sport don't give a shit about the sport. They care about this. They care about this. They don't care about what you're seeing on the fucking TV. They want this. And right now, with Texas and Tennessee and Georgia, they got this. The Big Ten got a lot of this. ACC really happy because they got 2 teams and they got a lot of this from those 2 teams. They're 1-9 in bowl games right now, but at least they got paid for being there. So that was like the last little rant that I was going to give on that subject for the evening. Thanks, everybody, for joining. My friend is no longer online. I don't even think he texted me. Oh, wait. Yeah, he did. Hang on. ETA, that was 43 minutes ago. Let me text him. You still on? ? Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to shut down the connection on OBS to YouTube, switch over to my Twitch channel. You can follow me there at Lucid Creamin, CREAM1N, capital L, capital C. And yeah, I would really appreciate it. And I appreciate you guys for being here once more. I'm going to find a way to less awkwardly transition to the end of these videos in the future. But I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning.